time, at least at Happening Out, that both of you have been in the seat at the same time, and your principal work is in the trans community.
That is true. And in fact, when David asked me to be on the show today, I said I will be on if Tony's on.
Yeah,
I love that we're on together.
Yeah.
We've been friends for what? Longer than Al and I have been friends.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah. Like 2002?
Probably.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Misty and I have cruised together many, many times.
Yep.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I need to cruise with you guys once that's a thing again.
Apparently we can't go to Alaska now.
Can I go to Alaska?
That's right.
Blame Canada.
Well, this is a big news show. We're going to hit it right out of the gate after I introduce y'all. Here we go. Well, welcome to Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only LGBTQ daily evening news. It's time to queer up the news. It's 7 p.m. Tuesday, February 16th, and we are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we're going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight. The world's first live daily queer evening news show. Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight. Well, thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. This is a live, unedited LGBTQ evening news show. Whatever happens, you're going to see it. This evening, we bring you the news of and a perspective representing the LGBTQ community from South Florida, America, and across our world. I'm your Queer News Tonight anchor, Al Ferguson, and tonight, let's welcome anchor Misty Eyes. She is the Director of Transgender Services, Women's Services, and Training Education for SunServe, a model social service agency serving the LGBTQ community with compassionate and progressive care. She's a highly celebrated and award-winning entertainer, MC, journalist, drag queen, and makeup artist who has accomplishments that have been featured in popular TV and print vehicles, including the New York Times, and is currently featured prominently in promotional videos and print campaigns for the Greater Fort Lauderdale Convention and Visitors Bureau, highlighting Fort Lauderdale's welcoming environment. Good evening, Misty.
Thank you guys so much for having me back. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm very passionate about what I do, and I love my job. And if you want to help me raise money for SunServe, please go to sunserve.org/Misty. We are raising money for our AIDS walk, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and every dollar you pledge to Misty, it's like buy one, get one free in terms of the match. And who's matching it?
AHF.
AHF, excellent. Next, let's welcome anchor Tony Lima. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Ariana's Center, Trans-Latina, Florida, the only direct service and advocacy organization based here in South Florida, led by a trans-Latina openly living with HIV. He is a longtime South Florida LGBTQ activist, advocate, and political operative, as well as a seasoned communicator, marketer, and fundraiser. Good evening, Tony.
Hey, Al. I'm so excited to be here tonight with you and Misty, two of my favorite people ever.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fun show.
As I said in the countdown, this is the first time that I've sat in the anchor seat with two of the principal trans activists sitting on both sides.
Yeah.
It's going to be great and exciting. Tonight we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast. And here are the bullet points of queer news for today, Tuesday, February 16th. Hold on to your seat. Breaking queer news. The House announces a floor vote Tuesday on the Equality Act. The president promised the most significant piece of LGBTQ legislation in the history of this nation in the first 100 days. This afternoon, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, who manages the floor proceedings in the House, affirmed in a Dear Colleague letter the Equality Act would be one of the first two pieces of legislation the chamber will take up next Tuesday.
Congress is heading full steam ahead with the Equality Act legislation to expand LGBTQ civil rights protections with a full House floor vote next Tuesday. Hoyer wrote, quote, "Coming to the floor next week is the Equality Act, which will end legal discrimination against LGBTQ Americans," end quote. Katie Drew Grant, a Hoyer spokesperson, predicted the legislation may come next Thursday, but added that timeline could shift as coronavirus relief legislation comes together and gets scheduled.
Representative David Cicilline and Senator Jeff Merkley are set to introduce the Equality Act in their respective chambers of Congress as they have in past years. Although the Supreme Court decision last year in Bostock versus Clayton County extended vast protections for LGBTQ people under federal law, it secured a prohibition against anti-LGBTQ discrimination in the workplace. Sought for decades by movement leaders as well as all areas of civil rights law where sex discrimination is prohibited, the Equality Act would take things a step further. The Equality Act would take last year's Supreme Court decision in Bostock a gigantic step further, in addition to the explicit declaration that anti-LGBTQ discrimination is a form of sex discrimination in employment, education, housing, jury service, and credit. The Equality Act would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex and LGBTQ status in public accommodations and federal programs. Further, the Equality Act would expand the definition of public accommodations under civil rights law to include retail stores, banks, transportation services, and healthcare services.
The legislation, importantly, would also establish that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a 1994 law aimed at protecting religious liberty, cannot be used to enable anti-LGBTQ discrimination. Queer News Tonight has been broadcasting since January 6, 2020. Today is very likely the most important news we have ever brought to the LGBTQ America, until the Equality Act passes.
This is absolutely major, and my only regret is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg could not be here to see that she paved the way and made this possible with her basis of sex back many years ago. I'm super proud to be an American today.
It's exciting as someone that's been working on this specifically for so many years at the state level, at the federal level, to have this almost come to fruition to this capacity is incredible. I sit here week after week with these beautiful people telling you all the news, telling you what's important, and it seems like every day we have something more and more exciting to tell, which I think is great news for all of us as we move into 2021 and further from the pandemic and further from all this negativity that we've been exposed to for the last several years.
Tony, I thought about you when I heard this news. It broke late this afternoon. You were the first person I thought of because you've been in that fight for a long, long time. It's super interesting to me. Over the last 2.5 years that it's happening out, I've had so many discussions, arguments, and even fights with the Trump, Gays for Trump, and the log cabin Republicans, who always said, nope, we don't need the Equality Act because the 1964 Civil Rights Act does everything that we need for protection for LGBT. And I would go, no, it doesn't. Another host would say, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
We're going to report 2 stories tonight where the Civil Rights Act, no, it doesn't. When the Equality Act passes, the ridiculousness that's going on in the states will completely fall apart. And watch me say it again when we get to those individual stories. The most important thing that we've ever reported on at Q News, we've just reported on. Next, let's queer up entertainment. Blue's Clues and You series highlights 9 LGBTQ plus flags in a new video. We go from the Equality Act to Nickelodeon. Love that. Nickelodeon's long-running children's program, Blue's Clues, has included 9 LGBTQ plus flags in their Alphabet music video. The new video is part of the new rendition of the classic series titled Blue's Clues and You. In the visual, the 2 singers list every letter in the alphabet while associating them with activities, people, or magical creatures. When they reach the letter P, the voiceover actors sing, quote, "And P is full of pride," end quote. While displaying the 9 flags, the video included flags for the trans community, pansexual, non-binary, asexual, intersex, lesbian, bisexual community, and of course, the main pride flag. This isn't the first time Nickelodeon showcased their support for the LGBTQ plus community. Last year, the network took to Twitter to account celebrating Pride Month, stating, quote, celebrating hashtag Pride with the LGBTQ plus community and their allies this month and every month, end quote. The inclusion is historic, as Blue's Clues is an entertainment program teaching conversation for children.
This is so important. Children that are struggling with their being different or weird and struggling with feelings and thoughts of I'm broken and I don't fit into my own family needs situations that they can look up to and see that they're not alone in this world and there is somebody just like them. And I'm super impressed that this children's program is sharing LGBTQ education.
I'm impressed that they've included all the flags, right? So they want to be as inclusive as possible and have included every potential flag as to not exclude anyone. And I think that's an amazing thing. That's great for Blue's Clues and for the parents that are having their children watch this. What an amazing tool to start to teach diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I love reporting on this and delivering this story to America because first, it's a children's program. And it's a children's program where sex has nothing to do with the children's program. It is an inclusion and diversity conversation, which is important. Misty's observation about if you feel weird. No, it's not weird. It's different. That's all. I frequently am a voice that talks about the division in our community and LGBTQ and how we divide, and flags sometimes can represent that. I echo Tony's observation. In this situation, they bring everyone together with the use of the diversity that potentially could be divisive of different representations in the LGBTQ community. Bravo, Nickelodeon.
Next week, we're at Gay Culture. Are you ready for Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week? What are you doing for Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week? If you didn't know, Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week, also known as ASAW, is for raising awareness for advancing acceptance for aromantic spectrum identities, which include people who are generally uninterested in romantic relationships. It is held on the first full week following Valentine's Day, which in 2021 is from February 21st to February 27th. The celebratory event is internationally recognized during the week. LGBTQ groups worldwide will hold events to raise awareness of aromanticism and show support for people on the aromantic spectrum. When it comes to LGBTQ topics, a big emphasis is made on sexual orientation, based on sexual attraction, what people feel towards others. But people have a romantic orientation as well, based on the emotional attraction they may feel towards other people. While the two are often connected, sexual attraction and romantic attraction are different for many people. Aromantics are people who do not seek romantic attraction or lack the experience of that feeling. This is similar to asexual people who do not seek or feel the experience of sexual attraction. According to ASAW website, it was created so aromantic people could come together and celebrate their own unique experiences. The Aromantic Spectrum Union for Recognition, Education, and Advocacy, AUREA, the website aromantic.lgbt, and others in the romantic identity community lead the way in organizing the event yearly.
This is really interesting. I wonder, Misty, you know about a lot of this stuff because you teach these kind of subjects. So is this for also like people like me who are hoping to have a romantic something at some point, but it's not quite happening right now? Would I be included there?
Not at all. No, you're experiencing a dry spell. An aromantic, it's always a dry spell. They don't want it to rain ever.
Wow, that's interesting.
Having known Tony for a while, he is definitely experiencing a dry spell.
A very dry spell.
Now,
thank you, Mike.
I want to make the joke exactly like Tony did because Misty is the expert sitting at this table on this. I'm embarrassed to say I knew virtually nothing about this. I didn't know that there was this identification in our community. It's embarrassing for me to admit that. So I'm going to land on the joke about the dry spell to divert attention from my lack of knowledge.
That's okay. A lot of people do confuse aromantic and asexual. Asexual means I don't want penetration. And a lot of asexuals are totally okay with the foreplay, the kissing, the touching, the holding. That's what they focus on. That's what they want. But they don't want to take off their underwear. They want to keep that on. They don't want sex, but they want compassion and they want intimacy. Whereas aromantic people don't want intimacy at all. They just want roommates or friends, and that's it.
Oh, I definitely want to take off my underwear. That's not me then. Thank you, Misty, for that. On that note, let's queer up hell.
Can we return to the dry spell?
this is
I want to
why.
return to the dry spell.
Like, you're definitely not aromantic.
Arkansas Senate passes discriminatory LGBTQ plus healthcare bill. The Medical Ethics and Diversity Act, also known as Senate Bill 289, is newly passed legislation which allows healthcare providers to refuse healthcare services to those that violate their personal beliefs. The new regulation also protects medical practitioners and healthcare institutions on their chosen decisions. Arkansas State Manager of the Human Rights Campaign called the decision, quote, a blatantly discriminatory attempt to strip LGBTQ people of basic rights. Healthcare should be available to all who need it, not withheld by providers because of hate and fear, end quote. The Senate bill clearly states that practitioners have, quote, the right not to participate in a healthcare service that violates their conscience, end quote. This means institutions and practitioners have clear grounds to deny aid. The bill also offers legal protections for those refusing to provide healthcare. The Medical Ethics and Diversity Act states those denying services are not civilly, criminally, or administratively liable for the exercise of conscious rights not to participate in a healthcare service by a medical practitioner employed, contracted, or granted admitting privileges by a healthcare institution. This means institutions and practitioners that fall under the healthcare umbrella, for example, hospital staff, nursing home care, and ambulance staff, are within their rights to refuse offering or agreeing to treatment. Early this week, the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act, or Senate Bill 289, was read for a third time and passed and immediately sent to the State House. The bill received 27 votes in favor and 6 votes against.
You know,
Well, let's unpack this. Why would they deny services? Why would ambulance drivers say, I can deny services? Okay, Arkansas is going to give protection. But why? Well, it's a religious exemption. And the religious exemption is because of my religion, I don't have to. And that's what Arkansas has done. Now, the 1964 Civil Rights Act does nothing to protect that. Guess what's getting ready to happen? The Equality Act is going to pass, and the religious exemption is going to fall, and then Arkansas's enforcement of this ridiculous and punitively discriminatory law will fall the way of the wind. Their only choice will be to challenge it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court last summer already expanded the definitions of sexual protection to the LGBTQ community. Arkansas, and you 27 that are getting ready, that voted for this, you're getting ready to lose. You're going to lose.
can you imagine if this law were to pass and all medical people could keep their little personal hats on? I believe this about whatever, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, and push their own personal convictions on every person they were having surgeries on.
Unbelievable.
That would, no way. It would be a nightmare.
I'm an ambulance driver and I don't want to handle a black person. What's the difference now?
Oh, I go to a no, that would be no.
No.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, to add to Al's point, it's wonderful that what just broke today is happening,
So
because
excited.
then this kind of stuff can't continue to happen. For years, people have been using their religious beliefs, their personal beliefs, in order to discriminate. So the more that we end these kind of ridiculous bills, the better off we're going to be as a society as a whole. The more progress we need to make. So I just feel like when I was reading this, I kept on thinking, this isn't going to happen anyway. Right, but how ridiculous that they're wasting taxpayer dollars on trying to push something like this that clearly is just focused on discrimination.
Yeah, and I'm definitely a Southerner, but Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, unfortunately Florida, South Carolina, they all have a commonality.
Right.
They have a commonality, and it's called ignorance.
Truth.
I thought you were going to say suck it.
Right.
It's like, just suck it.
Yeah,
Done.
that's it. All right, well, let's continue by queering up politics. Let's move to the other end of the country. Gay Trump lackey Richard Grenell is considering a run for California governor. Former Trump administration official Richard Grenell is apparently considering a run for California governor should a recall effort against Governor Gavin Newsom succeed. Grenell became the first openly gay person to hold a cabinet-level position after twice impeached former president, love the sound of that, Donald Trump last year named him to be temporary acting director of national intelligence. Previously, Grenell had served as ambassador to Germany. He frequently waded into debates over Trump and the Trump administration's anti-LGBTQ actions, including claiming that the former president was, quote, the strongest ally that gay Americans had ever had in the White House, end quote. Pause a moment on that. A statement that drew condemnation from LGBTQ organizations across the country. Now, Politico reports that Grenell is putting in motion a plan to run for California governor. It comes amid efforts by Republicans in the state to recall Governor Newsom, a Democrat, over conservative backlash to Newsom's policies regarding COVID-19. The Republican National Committee has reportedly already given $250,000 to the effort to recall Newsom, which is seeking the 1.5 million signatures necessary to add a recall to the ballot. Should the initiative succeed, Grenell will throw his hat into the ring for the inevitable runoff election for governor once the recall effort successfully reaches the ballot, according to one of Politico's sources. However, the close Trump ally could face a significant uphill battle to convince voters, given they rejected Donald Trump by an almost 2-to-1 margin in November's presidential election. Biden won the state with 64% of the votes compared to Trump's 34%. One GOP strategist told Politico that Grenell's candidacy would be, quote, a disaster. That's a huge gift to Newsom to be able to frame the recall as Trumpist versus him, end quote. And lest we forget, Grenell was a major player in Gays for Trump. As it turned out, the community is not.
You know, I firmly believe that your word is your bond. And I think that when you are going to speak about something, people need to pay attention. And you open your mouth when it's something important. And this man who has repeatedly said Trump has been our best president for LGBTQ and has done more for the LGBT community than anyone ever in history, I wonder if his bar for his policies will be set as low.
That's interesting. You're right. You're absolutely right. What's great about this is we have to consider that California is incredibly Democratic as a whole. So this is a huge gift to Gavin Newsom. He should take it and run with it. The narrative is absolutely Trumpists are trying to get him out of the way. So use it, Governor Newsom. Do as much as you can with it and just win your reelection. We need you to do that.
Right.
When the words Richard Grenell and Gays for Trump roll off my tongue, I immediately think of Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Senate confirmed cabinet member Pete Buttigieg.
We love that.
Cha-ching.
That's all I think of.
Next, we queer up the USA. HUD bars anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination in housing, rentals. For the first time ever, it will be illegal to turn away people looking to rent an apartment or buy a house simply because they are queer. Officials in the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced Thursday that the agency will be implementing President Joe Biden's executive order barring discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. On Wednesday afternoon, HUD officials told reporters in a press call that housing discrimination against LGBTQ plus was rampant and, quote, demands urgent enforcement action. HUD also said every person should be able to secure a roof over their head free from discrimination, and the action we will take tomorrow will move us closer to that goal. Last June, the Supreme Court ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits sex discrimination, covered sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace. Courts have since interpreted that ruling to mean that sex discrimination protects LGBTQ plus people in many areas of life, including housing, public accommodations, healthcare, and education. Biden's executive order directed federal agencies to similarly apply the Supreme Court ruling in their agencies because the Fair Housing Act already bars sex discrimination. Officials said a new law is not required to protect LGBTQ plus people who are looking to buy a home or rent a house. HUD is the first agency to implement the measures in the January 20 executive order, a move that has as much symbolic meaning as it does practical significance.
Absolutely, and I love how you say roof. I absolutely love that.
I'm from Alaska, is that a thing? I don't know.
Well, this is incredibly important when you consider that a big part of the LGBTQ community are people that are living below the poverty level, don't have access to housing. And when it comes to the trans community, and Misty can speak to this even more so because we both deal with this on a daily basis, but trans people are being discriminated against in every facet of their lives, including housing. So just being kicked out of your house for simply being who you are and living your authentic self is an incredibly tragic thing. Because what we need to do is to be able to make a living, but also have a place to sleep and rest soundly.
You know, it's interesting to me when I saw Misty and she came to the set, she had not heard yet the breaking news on the Equality Act coming to the floor next week. And I said to Misty, and it was just my absolute first reaction, legal discrimination against trans people is getting ready to end in America. In one sentence, it's getting ready to end in America. Now, do you change attitudes? No. That's a process that we continue to fight, and both of you and your different organizations will continue to fight it. But the legal right to do it is going to end. It is. That's it.
It's amazing how much of an uphill battle it is to be a trans person. And I've been fortunate to live where I live now for 6.5 years. But when me and my husband were looking for the apartment together, and oh my gosh, literally the second they found out I was trans, suddenly there was a credit score that was ridiculous, or suddenly there was a thing. And I talked to people because I was trying to move into an apartment complex that a friend of mine lived in. And I'm like, oh my God, you have a 735 credit score? He's like, no, we don't. And I'm like, well, they told me that. And then where I live now, my landlord, I'm legally Misty, I'm legally female, I'm married to a straight man, and I didn't think there would be such an issue, but when my current landlord called my previous landlord, where I'd lived for a very long time, she called me he. She called me Misty, but she called me he, and every time. She was 86 years old and says, oh, he was a great tenant, he was whatever. So my new landlord, my current landlord, called my realtor and said, I'm so confused. Is this a guy or a girl? And then my realtor told him that I was trans, and he said, quote, oh, I'm going to need a $2,500 deposit. And he goes, you can ask for a pet deposit. You cannot ask for a trans deposit. Are you looking for a lawsuit? And fortunately, I didn't have to pay that deposit and I moved in. But living there the first year, I was like, will my rent go up sky high? Will I be forced to move out? Like, he's been an amazing landlord, but wow, discrimination is very real. And I looked for months and months to find a place because nobody wanted to rent to a trans person.
And interesting, horrible, but interesting, that story that you just told, remember the HUD news that we have just done here at Queer News Tonight applies to Tony for being gay. It applies to Tony for being a Latino gay.
Oh, brown,
it applies to Al being a privileged white gay. It applies to Al if I were a bisexual. It applies to me. It applies to everyone.
Absolutely.
That's what is important in today.
I think the good news, just to add one last thing, is that policy will help drive the discourse, which will then help change hearts and minds, right? So this is often the first step before we can make real, meaningful change.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. It's a great segue to this. Let's queer up trans rights. Anti-trans healthcare bill would force Alabama schools to out transgender students to their parents. Alabama Republican lawmakers are pushing a bill that would bar transgender youth under the age of 19 from accessing gender-affirming medical care, and also contains a provision to force school authorities to out transgender children to their parents. The bill, proposed by State Representative Wes Allen, who's a Republican, is called the Alabama Vulnerable Child Compassion and Protection Act. But its intent is to make it a Class C felony, meaning that any doctor or medical provider who prescribes dispenses, or administers puberty blockers or hormones to transgender children, or performs gender confirmation surgery on a trans youth could end up serving up to 10 years in prison. The intent of the bill, as stated by Allen, is to delay transgender youth from accessing gender-affirming treatments for gender dysphoria, using the rationale that youth pursuing a gender transition are making an impulsive, life-altering decision that they will come to regret. Republicans in the Alabama Senate are considering a nearly identical bill sponsored by Senator Shay Shelnutt, a Republican, which was approved by the Senate Health Committee on Wednesday by an 11-2 vote and will soon be voted on by the Republican-dominated upper chamber. The House bill also contains a provision stating that the transgender children will not be able to talk to their school officials about their struggles with gender dysphoria or even bullying at the hands of other students without those officials reporting back to their parents, who may not be accepting of their child's gender identity, potentially resulting in a trans youth being kicked out of their home or subjected to conversion therapy against their will.
You know, it's been a mind-blowing day. I wish you could sit here with me in between Misty and Tony in terms of the news that we're reporting on today. First off, the title of the act is the Child Compassion and Protection Act. How George Orwell can you get? Because it's the exact opposite of that. First off, it's a total lie. Second, Alabama, you're going to lose. Pass it. Elections matter. Your state and local elections matter because you get this kind of crazy at the state level that will pass these kinds of things. They're going to lose, however, when it is appealed to the Supreme Court, which it will be now under the justification of last summer's ruling by the Supreme Court and the soon-to-be Equality Act on the federal level. So Alabama will be trumped out of this conclusion. Third quick observation. In this one episode today, in February 2021, I think we have delivered greater news in volume to the LGBTQ community than in any month in 2020. Just in this episode, that's how things are changing for the LGBTQ community. You don't think that the election of Joe Biden was important? Wow.
My mind is all over the place with this story. It's going in so many directions at once, and I have so many things I want to say. The first thing I want to say is gatekeeping. So many people in the trans community are anti-gatekeeping. For example, you must see a therapist in order to get hormones. You must see a doctor in order to change your gender marker on your ID. There's a lot of hurdles we have to overcome. But in this exact situation, no child is going to go on the street and buy testosterone blockers. No child is going to run down the street and inject themselves with estrogen. There's gatekeeping in the place to protect these children from making rash decisions. It's impossible to just suddenly decide, oh, I'm going to go buy all these. Like, it's not like cigarettes. You can't go to the gas station and buy it. There's gatekeeping involved. You must see a therapist. You must talk about your gender dysphoria. You must go overcome these hurdles. So it's not like these kids are making rash decisions. My second point is, if I had a time machine, I would go back to 10 years old and force my parents to allow me testosterone blockers. Once you go through male puberty, or once the effects of testosterone have taken place on your body, they are permanent, which means if your voice deepens, it is forever deepened. If you become 6'1", you're forever 6'1". If your shoulders expand and your beard grows, that is all permanent. And it's very expensive to change some of those things, and the others are irreversible.
Yeah, you know what I'm thinking about when we're telling this story is how there's all this double speak in these kinds of bills, right? Like these bills, that title was very intentional, as they often are, because you want the general public to support the legislation that you're proposing. So like you said off camera, Misty, earlier, you said, oh, a legislator may read this and just vote for it because it sounds like the right thing. Well, that happens with the general public too. And it's all very intentional. So don't miss that. That's why elections matter. That's why it matters to be involved, not only in local, but statewide politics as well, and at the federal level, and watch what's happening and be aware of what's happening so that you, as a constituent that's voting these people in, you have an opinion on what's being voted on the floor. So very important to stay connected and not just to read a title and be like, oh, this must be good. No, Dive deeper because they're often used as tactics to confuse in order to further discriminate.
You know, I'm curious. We're going to close the conversation on this subject, but today in Queer News Tonight, all of the things that we've reported on, my observation of this is more than a month in good news in 20. I'm sitting between a director at Ariana's Center, a major trans advocacy organization in America, and the director at SunServe, a major trans provider service in America. Did the two of you ever think that we would get to a single point like what we've talked about
No,
today?
this is groundbreaking.
Not in our lifetimes, not at all.
Yeah.
That's what's washing over me, honestly. And I'm thrilled that I've gotten to experience it with both of you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Well, that is our queer headlines for today. So let's catch up on the LGBTQ news surrounding COVID-19 with our special segment called Quarantine Quickies. Tonight we report on the continuing devastating effect that coronavirus is having on the American and worldwide LGBTQ community in total cases and deaths. Tonight we report that more than 1.9 million LGBTQ Americans have contracted COVID-19 and nearly 35,000 LGBTQ Americans have died from coronavirus. As of today, more than 55 million doses have been given in the United States. So let's queer up Quarantine Quickies. A new alarm is sounded as LGBT people of color have twice the likelihood of testing positive for COVID-19. A new report from the Williams Institute has found LGBTQ people of color are twice as likely to test positive for COVID-19 as white non-LGBTQ people. According to the Williams Institute findings, 15% of LGBTQ people of color tested positive for COVID-19, compared to just 9% of non-LGBTQ white adults. Furthermore, LGBTQ people of color were over 50% more likely than white non-LGBTQ people to have personally known someone who died of COVID-19. LGBTQ people of color are also more likely to experience harsher economic impact of the pandemic. 29% of LGBTQ people of color reported problems affording basic household goods, compared to just 14% of non-LGBTQ white respondents. 26% of LGBTQ people of color reported having trouble paying their rent, almost 3 times the rate of straight white respondents. LGBTQ respondents of color are almost 3 times more likely to have been laid off recently due to the pandemic, and the Williams Institute concluded, quote, "The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on LGBTQ people cannot be fully understood without considering race and ethnicity, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity. The impact of the pandemic on LGBTQ people and LGBTQ people of color specifically must be taken into account as the federal government seeks to restore trust in institutions responding to this public health crisis and to provide support to those most economically affected by COVID-19. End of their comment.
You know, we just talked about the trans community and the trans community being marginalized. Now we're talking about people of color, and they are doubly impacted. And they are very much affected. They have so many hurdles. And when I talk about people of color from a stage point of view, I always say minority stress is real. Imagine if we were playing a Monopoly game with a big group of people, and the white people were the only ones allowed to play for the first 2 hours. Buy all the property because that's how you win. And then after those 2 hours, people of color are allowed to play. The same rules apply to them. However, almost everything's bought up. In America, for 400 years, people of color were not allowed to own property, period. They weren't allowed to have jobs, period. Now, with a 400-year head start and generational wealth and a systemic oppression and racism where you feel that white people are smarter, white people are richer, white people are better at everything, now when you talk about marginalized communities and access to healthcare, access to jobs, access to financing your house and cars, of course you are already systemically oppressed. You're already minority stressed. Now, how many people of color can pay for health insurance and go see a doctor on a regular basis? And when COVID-19 affects them, their health is already struggling. Because, oh, I don't need to pay for that doctor's visit because I have to pay for my baby mama and I got to pay for this and I got to pay for that. Health is put on the back burner for many people of color. And when COVID happens, yes, they are situationally majority affected by COVID-19 because they are not medically taken care of as a community.
Yeah, so this is another indication that systemic oppression, as you say, Misty, is real. Right? This is just another output of that reality. And we've been seeing this trending the entire time since the pandemic started. It's been reported that people of color were acquiring COVID-19 at much higher rates as their white counterparts. And this is all because of lack of information, lack of education, lack of resources in general in order to be able to stay on top of things. And I think it's a very tragic thing. And we're seeing it now as it relates to the pandemic, but in reality, it's really about most healthcare issues, right? People of color are disproportionately affected. Yeah. So it's just about really breaking down that systemic oppression further, being aware that this is a real thing and that it's all been intentional, as you said, for many, many, many years.
You know, a couple of thoughts. Gosh, again, I want to say, I'm really glad to be sitting in this seat tonight. Misty's analogy to the Monopoly game and buying the properties on a board to America's evolution over the last 400 years is near genius.
That was beautiful.
First. and Tony's observation in terms of this issue of this study is replicated in all versions of our healthcare system in the LGBTQ community is also brilliant. My observation cannot improve either one of those observations. However, I will observe that with all of the good news of things that we are seeing that has been occurring since certainly January 20th, we have an obligation to bring everybody along with us. So as things improve in our LGBTQ community, do not forget those that could be left behind because they're going to need your help more than ever before, and that's in our community. Well, that is our COVID-19 news for tonight. Next, we report that Happening Out Television Network helps support our LGBTQ community. An example is Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. We are broadcasting from our permanent set in supporting that partnership. The network broadcasts the largest LGBTQ religious broadcast in the world with more than 30,000 watching every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, and it's totally live. We encourage you to tune in. Our campaign of sponsorship proudly supports Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church. Watch this.
This is Joe Saunders, former state representative and Equality Florida senior political director. And Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
We'd also like to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living, here in Fort Lauderdale for making this set in this amazing queer church campus possible.
Finally, we thank Queer News Tonight's hotel sponsor, Best Western I-95 Fort Lauderdale. This is the closest and best choice to the famous Wilton Drive, and our hosts and guests stay at this LGBTQ ally partner. We encourage you to stay here when visiting South Florida.
Welcome to Q's Q&A on LGBTQ health and the pandemic. For nearly a year, this segment has been unique in America in answering your LGBTQ community questions about our unique health needs. We are proud to have Queer News Tonight health anchor Dr. Howard Grossman.
He's an American pioneer in HIV/AIDS medical treatment and was the executive director of the American Academy of HIV Medicine. He's a nationally recognized medical expert and proud member of our LGBTQ community. Good evening, Dr. Grossman.
Howard, before we move into this week's questions, we want to give you the opportunity to start of your thoughts about the health news that we heard that might apply to the LGBTQ community this week or the pandemic.
Well, I think you've brought up a lot of things that are important for LGBTQ health. I think the things that Misty was talking about the barriers that transgender people face, and that Tony was talking about, we see them every day here in practice. The gatekeeper stuff, the things that people have to come to me with. I don't require any kind of psychological counseling before starting hormone therapy, for example, in everybody, unless I see somebody who is actively hallucinating and clearly has difficulty making decisions. But we work on an informed consent policy that if somebody's an adult and can know the pros and cons of therapy, that they should be able to access care. And I think it makes a big difference for a lot of people. But we put all kinds of barriers in the way, especially of transgender people.
That's true.
And, I think, some of these, it's going to take a long time, even with the change in the Equality Act and things like that, to get rid of the old thinking.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's absolutely true. So let's jump right into the questions, the medical questions we have tonight. Misty, we're going to start with you.
Question number 1. Do you think we will handle the pandemic better in the next pandemic better in the United States?
Oh, there isn't any question about it, but it depends on who's in charge. I think we're already seeing changes since the change in administration, that we have the opening of the first federal vaccine centers. We're starting to see coordination of vaccine distribution. It seems, I do a call every week with friends of mine from college, 12 friends across the country from, Oklahoma, New York, California, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And it's very clear to me that vaccines have been distributed unequally. I mean, Florida is finding that they have an excess of vaccines in places like the Panhandle because people won't take it, and places like California, Massachusetts, and New York are really having shortages. So I think that something was done to distribution in the last administration that really penalizes blue states in particular. And hopefully that's getting straightened out. I think they're starting to look at viral variants. That's something that we're way behind the Europeans in, and really looking at these variations that come up. It turns out that there are 14 variants that have developed here in the U.S., and we're just beginning to find out about them. We talk a lot about the variants, the mutations that are occurring elsewhere, but they're occurring here. Yeah. And finally, under the Obama administration, there was a plan, a pandemic response plan, and everybody needs to remember that the Trump administration tore it up and threw it out. And that plan is back in place. So I do think that, the next pandemic will be handled differently.
Well, Dr. Grossman, you were just talking about variants, and our question number 2 is just about that. Can I request testing for different variants if I contract COVID-19?
That testing isn't available commercially. And I'm not sure exactly what difference it would make. So far, we're still not clear whether these variants that are popping up are more infectious, have a worse outcome, cause more hospitalizations. I mean, certainly the ones that this is all still in process of being investigated. So I'm not sure that what it would do to help. Interestingly, on a side topic, we did get an announcement yesterday from Quest that they are now running a test.
And you early on in the pandemic. So
exactly. And that will tell people if the vaccine has been effective in getting them to an immune state. And hopefully at some point we'll know how long, I always get the question, how long is the vaccine going to last? Hopefully we'll get the answer to that as people utilize testing like this.
Yeah, okay.
Question number 3, not COVID related. Should gay men be concerned about HPV or human papillomavirus?
Everybody should be concerned about papillomavirus. So papillomavirus, HPV, is the cause of warts, both genital warts and other warts. It is linked to cervical cancer, anal cancer, penile cancer, head and neck cancers, all caused by variants of HPV. There is a vaccine. There are vaccines for HPV. The most effective vaccine has, there are many kinds of HPV, but about 15 of them are considered to be high risk for cancer. They're not really high risk, they're more highly associated with. So most of the people that have those HPV variants don't get cancer, but everybody who gets cancer has those variants. And the papillomavirus vaccines protect against, they eliminate about 95% of the risk of cancer. And they're readily available. There are 3 shots given over 6 months. They are expensive. Insurance will cover it for everybody under 45 years of age now. For older people, if they choose to get them, they are expensive. They're $150 to $250 a piece, and there's 3 shots. And insurance may not cover for people over 45, but it's worth thinking about. Anybody who's had sex with 3 people has probably been exposed to some form of HPV. So we were all exposed, and that's why we try to vaccinate people as young as possible. But even if you've been sexually active for a while, you probably have not been exposed to all the variants. So the vaccine's still useful.
Okay, and we're running short on time, but Howard, I wanted to ask you about, we have, you especially, have worked so hard in the last year of asking the LGBTQ community to pay attention. We've echoed that and tried to be as loud as we could in your recommendations, masking, social isolation, what to do in restaurants, et cetera, and so on. Have you had any concerns in the last week or recent weeks that media in America has kind of lost their footing a little bit in terms of the declines that we're seeing in issues, and that they're starting to beat the drum of the news of COVID harder and harder? Do you have any feel for that and any advice of what we should be listening to ensure that we're listening to the right things, that they're continuing on their frantic pace of COVID, and that in some sectors they're making it even worse than I've heard in terms of relation to South Africa and the UK. I heard MSNBC today basically said the world was coming to an end on the UK variant. Any advice? Do you agree with do you have any concerns on media voice continuing to propel COVID? And is there anything that we should be doing in listening to it?
Well, go back to the beginning of this whole thing. We talked very early on about how the media was engaging in panic porn and trying to keep eyes glued to the screen, that rather than giving people useful information of what tests they should get, how to really avoid things, the precautions they should take, all they were talking about was like death, and everybody was going to die. And they do panic people. I'll tell you, my niece is involved in biomedical research, and she works in a level 4 biocontainment lab in New York. Okay, those are the ones where you wear a spacesuit to go to work. She called me panicked about these variants because she spoke to an epidemiologist who said that they were coming, and she was sure. And I said, honey, you work in a biocontainment lab every day. You work in the riskiest place in the world. Get real about risk. So yeah, I think that they are doing that, but we have to face the reality that the numbers continue to climb, that the U.S. has done such a bad job with this, that we're still living in this petri dish, that we've vaccinated a minority of people at this point. So we have a long way to go. So I think, it's the precautions. People need to realize that they've been doing these precautions for a year, They've remained uninfected. Those people are doing the right thing. But there are plenty of people around this country that are giving up and going about as if there's nothing wrong. Certainly here in Florida, I saw it in Texas as I was on my way back from Hawaii. We should all be Hawaii. They are so cautious there and so careful, and people really do follow the rules. But I think people are getting lazy and they're getting burned out about it. And that's something that we need to fight against. That's really the message people need to keep.
Okay, crystal clear there. All right, well, that's tonight's Q&A on LGBTQ health and the pandemic. We're here every Tuesday night with Dr. Howard Grossman to answer your questions. Need medical assistance, and of course you do, we encourage you to contact Midway Specialty Care Center with 10 locations here in Florida, and especially Dr. Howard Grossman here in Wilton Manors and covering all across South Florida. Thank you again being with us tonight, Howard.
Thank you all.
We are going to end tonight's broadcast with the big finish, and these are today's silly or news that entertains the LGBTQ community. Here we go. The big finish. Thank you, science. You finally proved it. Stupid people are more likely to be homophobic. There's a new study out that shows, both in terms of IQ and your education levels, a level of stupidity helps you become homophobic. That's what the new study concluded.
Well, I love that it's backed by science now, because I feel like we've known this, right? Like the stupidest people are the ones that are the most homophobic. That's common knowledge within our community.
Yeah, the senates in Arkansas and Alabama.
Let's leave Alaska out of this. There are tons of hillbilly people in Alaska.
And there's
I love
a governor in
related
Florida I've
to
heard a
me.
little bit about, and a senator from Florida. A couple of senators from Florida. We'll get them in a science study and see what happens.
The more cultured and educated you are, that just makes sense. So
Yeah.
I don't know why science had to prove it, but thank you.
Yeah, and we probably spent $1.5 million to conclude that.
But now we have backup.
Yeah, exactly. The big finish. Gay gas. A 9 to 5 reunion is happening.
Working 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So
I
I
love
heard-
that it's the vintage picture that we're showing, right? That's good. That's exciting. I wonder what this reunion is going to entail, right? Like we hear this happening with these kind of shows like Sex and the City, for example, will now have a new like 6-part series. So are they going to show us these ladies where they are now? Are they going to show us a new generation?
I don't mean to burst your bubble, Tony, but that is not what's happening at all. And I was on board with you. I was like, yes, I heard about this. I am a huge Dolly Parton fan. I'm not going to lie. I've loved her since always. But she's just appearing on the Grace and Frankie set for an episode.
Yeah.
Not
so
about 9 to 5. It's not about sex discrimination. It's not about sexual harassment. She's going to be on Grace and Frankie with the cast. Of
Wait,
9 to 5.
you mean our headline in the big finish misrepresented something?
This is media, Al.
All right.
Just-
After all. Okay. And you're sitting right there in that chair spreading it, spreading those rumors. All right. In the big finish, come on down to Florida. The weather is fine, Texas. It's Florida spring break. And proof of that is that nearly 200 Florida manatees are basking in the shallow waters of the beach, mingling with local dolphins.
I think this is beautiful.
I could watch this for days.
Dolphins are my
reminds me.
spirit animal.
I've been here all my life and I've never seen this before.
Not this many together,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Or
in
then the
ocean.
dolphins like
they're
circling
mostly
around.
in our rivers and our canals and Florida Powered Light power stations in the winter in February. But
Man,
this is
we
need
very
more of this.
unusual.
The manatee
Right?
numbers are still greatly down from the last 10 years, but over last year we have a lot more, so that's good.
Does anybody like the pun comparison that the snowbirds and the people that travel from up north to Florida are fat and obese and weigh 1,000 pounds?
That went over my head.
And they're playing with the beautiful dolphins of Florida that live here year round.
No.
Oh, I didn't get that.
I was, for me, spring break
Really?
was college kids.
Really?
but
College
now that
kids-
you say it, Al, yes.
Really?
I'm with
It wasn't snowbird, it was spring break. That's college kids.
We're done. We're just done.
That is today's news for the LGBTQ community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ evening news show. Is our community important to you?
I don't know. Is it, Misty?
Then help us, you guys, by like and subscribing, ring the bell for updates, share this news. We are the only television live video news that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support.
You know, I've always wanted to say LGBTQ community, we've had a good day. We've had a good day.
We did.
I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and on behalf of anchors Misty Eyes and Tony Lima, we'll see you daily and tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Good night, America.